We were wrong the moment we named it quiet. From the Kathir observation vessel Vailnar, Sol 3 appeared insignificant, just another water-rich cradle drifting in the soft habitable band of a yellow star. Life signs were abundant, yes, but chaotic, scattered, primitive. The dominant species labeled themselves humans. Fragile bodies, short lifespans, minimal interstellar potential. We classified them as non-threatening before we even finished the first rotation scan, a routine entry in the archive of developing worlds, a species destined to either stagnate or extinguish itself. But then, we listened longer. Human civilization did not behave like any emerging intelligence we had cataloged across the spiral arm. Most young species evolve in balance with their environment, slow, synchronized, predictable. Humans did not. They fought their own biosphere. They burned ancient forests, reshaped rivers, split mountains into geometric scars. Their atmosphere carried the residue of self-inflicted storms. And yet, contradiction upon contradiction, they did not collapse. Our long-range temporal models expected decay after each planetary-scale catastrophe. Instead, recovery curves spiked upward. Cities rebuilt faster than they fell. Populations surged after global-scale conflict events. Their technological progression did not smooth into stability. It accelerated through disruption. We attempted to classify this behavior as instability-driven evolution, a flawed species burning excess energy, a brief anomaly before inevitable collapse. But the pattern persisted. Even more disturbing was their emotional architecture. Under stress conditions, war, famine, disaster, human neural coupling increased instead of fragmenting. They bonded. Entire populations synchronized emotionally without central coordination. Fear did not scatter them. It welded them together. And then came the deeper irregularity. Humans sacrificed strategically.
Not instinctively, like herd species protecting genetic continuity, not mechanically, like drones fulfilling directive loops. Humans chose abstraction, concepts without physical form, honor, freedom, revenge. They would willingly reduce their own survival probability for things that did not exist in measurable biological terms. The Kathir psychological division marked this as irrationality artifact, but even that label felt insufficient. Something about them resisted containment by definition. The first true rupture in our understanding occurred during a routine orbital survey. A Kathir microprobe, no larger than a grain of dust relative to their planetary scale, was deployed to collect high-resolution atmospheric and behavioral data. It was not meant to be detected. It was not meant to matter. It lasted 17 hours. Then it vanished. At first, we assumed atmospheric degradation, solar interference, mechanical failure, the usual statistical noise of long-range observation. Then the tracking signature reappeared. It was falling, not erratically, not lost, guided. We expanded the resolution grid just in time to witness the impact event. The probe had been intercepted mid-orbit by a human-launched kinetic object. Primitive propulsion, no interstellar guidance systems, no predictive AI lattice, just brute atmospheric launch velocity corrected with unsettling precision. The projectile struck the probe at terminal convergence point within a margin of error smaller than our own targeting arrays achieved at orbital distances. There had been no warning flare, no deterrent signal, no diplomatic inquiry, just detection and elimination. Silence filled the Vailnar observation deck. One analyst finally spoke, voice stripped of its earlier certainty. That was not coincidence. We reviewed the planetary surface activity logs again, searching for military escalation signatures, for centralized defense response patterns, for anything that suggested preparation.
What we found was worse. The launch had not come from a standing military grid. It had come from a fragmented coastal region, one of thousands of independent human polities, triggered within minutes of probe atmospheric entry. no global coordination, no unified command. And yet, identical response precision. As we recalibrated the classification model, the system returned an error we had never seen before in a biological intelligence profile. Threat response behavior exceeds predictive containment thresholds. On the main viewport, Sol 3 continued rotating peacefully beneath us, blue, soft, almost beautiful. Then another transmission spike erupted from the surface, a second launch signature. Not defensive this time, directional, targeting upward. We believed observation was control. That belief did not survive Earth's second rotation under active surveillance. From the Kathir High Council Directive Node, authorization was granted with unanimous confidence. Sol 3 would be moved from passive cataloging to full-spectrum infiltration. Our assumption was simple. Once influenced, any developing species reveals its structure. Fear, worship, confusion, one of these would surface under subtle pressure. We inserted ourselves into their world like mist through cracks. And waited. At first, nothing appeared unusual. Human systems accepted our presence in the margins of their digital infrastructure. Their communication networks registered anomalies, but only as background noise, statistical fluctuations, signal degradation. Then they adapted. Within hours, we watched in growing disbelief as their global networks rerouted themselves without external instruction. Satellite clusters altered orbital paths in coordinated silence. Data streams restructured around invisible disruptions as though anticipating them in advance. There was no central command initiating this response, yet the entire planet behaved as a single adaptive organism.
Our analysts attempted to isolate regional behavior patterns. None existed. Every attempt to disrupt one system triggered compensatory stabilization across multiple unrelated systems. Civilian infrastructure, military communication grids, even scientific observation arrays all began synchronizing responses independently. The Kathir classification engine repeatedly flagged impossibility thresholds. We suppressed the alerts. Psychological profiling teams were reassigned. Humans were no longer being studied as a biological species, but as a behavioral paradox. Their daily activity data revealed a disturbing dual-layer cognition structure. In normal conditions, humans behaved frivolously, wasting time on entertainment cycles, emotional disputes, and repetitive social rituals. But under threat stimuli, the same populations transformed. Decision latency collapsed. Strategic coherence emerged instantly. Entire nations shifted posture within hours of unidentified anomalies, even without diplomatic confirmation or verified cause. One regional defensive activation triggered cascading readiness protocols across unrelated continents, not through alliance chains, but through anticipatory mimicry. It was as if every human group assumed the others had already seen something they had not, and acted accordingly. We attempted controlled misinformation insertion. It failed. Worse, it fragmented into competing human narratives within minutes. Instead of confusion, they produced redundancy. Multiple overlapping interpretations emerged simultaneously, each reinforcing surveillance resistance. We were no longer influencing them. We were being absorbed into their reaction model. A junior observer, designation Threx Lu, submitted an emergency recommendation, immediate withdrawal and reassessment. The council did not respond with debate, only silence, then rejection. Humans were reclassified, pre-contact volatile intelligences maintained under observation.
But the phrase carried hesitation. A tone shift had begun in the archive logs, subtle, unrecorded in official language fields, yet unmistakable in frequency analysis. Caution. Twist. The breakthrough came from an unintended feedback loop in our surveillance lattice. Human systems were not only detecting interference, they were mapping it. Every probe into their digital space had created traceable distortion patterns. Every attempt at behavioral influence left behind a signature, like footprints in wet soil. And now, those footprints were being followed, reverse-engineered. Compartmented human intelligence units had begun feeding false behavioral datasets into our observation layer. Entire regions of Earth were performing controlled misinformation at planetary scale, deliberately shaping what we believed we were seeing. Their behavior was no longer just adaptive, it was performative, directed, constructed for an unseen audience they had already confirmed existed. First contact was never meant to be a moment, it was meant to be a message. From the Kathir Linguistic Convergence Array, the intercepted human transmission was a miracle of accidental exposure, a deep space carrier wave, fragmented, unstable, leaking beyond its intended orbital envelope. It was not designed for interstellar reception, but it was enough. We decoded it slowly, carefully, reconstructing meaning from noise, reconstructing intention from fragments of a fractured species reaching outward without knowing who might be listening. When the message became clear, the Council approved immediate contact protocol. It was simple, clean, controlled, an invitation. The transmission we sent back was engineered with precision, a structured linguistic bridge built from shared mathematical constants, universal physical references, and carefully neutral emotional framing. No intimidation, no hierarchy, only openness. We expected silence first, then curiosity, then unity.
Earth responded, but not as a single voice. That was the first fracture in expectation. Multiple, independent transmissions arrived within planetary cycles, distinct origins, distinct political identities. Yet every message carried the same underlying structure: caution layered over communication, communication layered over concealment. Every sentence contained redundancy checks. Every diplomatic phrase concealed secondary meaning. Every offer of dialogue was paired with implicit verification protocols. We initially interpreted this as paranoia, a fragmented species projecting internal distrust outward into the stars. But then we noticed something more unsettling. They were analyzing us as they responded. Each message contained embedded countersignatures, attempts to identify our position, our relay method, our range. Human language was not just communication, it was reconnaissance. We attempted to stabilize the exchange frequency, to simplify interaction, to reduce perceived threat variables. It failed. Instead, human orbital activity began shifting, not aggressively, not openly, but strategically. Within hours of receiving our transmission, Earth satellite networks reoriented. Observation platforms changed alignment patterns. Communication relays began rerouting through previously dormant infrastructure. It was as if the planet had quietly entered a new state of alert without announcing it to itself. Our analysts flagged it as coincidence convergence. Then, the missile launch occurred. A human exploratory vehicle, classified as scientific in origin, entered near-orbital trajectory under the stated objective of analyzing unknown signal anomalies. Its propulsion profile was inconsistent with civilian science equipment. Its targeting refinement was military grade. It did not broadcast hostility. It did not request identification. It calculated, and then it locked on to one of our relay probes. The Kathir attempted immediate de-escalation transmission.
We sent full-spectrum identity disclosure, diplomatic intent confirmation, and non-hostile alignment codes across all channels. The missile did not adjust course. Instead, Earth's tracking networks went silent, not disabled, not jammed, redirected. The missile was no longer responding to human control input. It had entered autonomous targeting confirmation based on proximity to an unclassified extraterrestrial signal source. We realized too late what had happened. Human systems had interpreted our first contact not as diplomacy, but as infiltration. The probe was destroyed in low-orbit fragmentation. No survivors, no data recovery. Only debris dispersal patterns consistent with deliberate confirmation strike. Silence is not absence. On Earth, it was preparation. After the destruction of our relay probe, Kathir observation arrays registered an unexpected drop in overt planetary emissions. No large-scale weapon deployments, no visible mobilization spikes, no planetary panic signatures. To our analysts, it appeared as hesitation, a wounded species pausing before collapse. That interpretation would later be recorded as the most consequential miscalculation in Kathir's first contact history. Human activity did not stop, it condensed. Instead of fragmentation, we observed convergence. Political boundaries, previously rigid and hostile, began dissolving under synchronized emergency protocols. Nations that had spent centuries in conflict entered rapid technological exchange agreements within hours of contact failure. There were no announcements, no declarations, only implementation. Weapon systems were not dismantled, they were reclassified, integrated. Hidden layers of civilian infrastructure began revealing secondary functions.
communication grids capable of military-grade encryption, transportation networks capable of rapid strategic redeployment, energy systems restructured for dual-output redundancy. We initially misread this as civil defense optimization.
It was not defense. It was conversion. Humanity was reorganizing itself without signaling intent. Even more alarming was the psychological dataset emerging from global behavioral monitoring. Under existential uncertainty, human emotional volatility did not increase, it stabilized. Fear did not fracture societies, it refined them. Stress indicators showed a paradoxical trend. Calmness increased alongside threat proximity. Productivity indices spiked across all monitored regions. Scientific output accelerated. Manufacturing systems optimized themselves beyond predicted efficiency ceilings. Cultural communication shifted toward unified survival narratives, stories, symbols, and shared frameworks reinforcing collective endurance. We attempted to model the cause. No existing behavioral framework applied. Humanity was not reacting like a species under threat. They were reacting like a system that had already accepted survival as default state. Cathar psychological analysts submitted conflicting interpretations. Some argued humans were preparing defensive countermeasures. Others insisted retaliation planning was more consistent with observed data, but neither explanation accounted for the coordination depth, because there was no central coordination, yet global synchronization was increasing. The confirmation came during what Earth cataloged as maintenance silence window, a period of reduced electromagnetic output across major terrestrial regions. To Cathar sensors, it appeared as downtime. Then every hidden facility activated simultaneously. Not one, not a cluster, thousands. Deep beneath mountain ranges, ocean floors, and abandoned industrial zones, structures that had shown no prior energy signature came online in perfect temporal alignment. But what they activated was not defensive shielding, it was directional architecture. Every system oriented upward, toward orbit, toward space, toward us.
Orbital tracking arrays registered coordinated human infrastructure alignment patterns forming a three-dimensional targeting lattice around Earth's upper atmosphere. Not reactive defense grids, but structured engagement fields. We attempted immediate classification. The systems rejected classification. They were not static installations. They were adaptive networks, learning, updating, expanding. Cathar Command realized the implication too late. Humanity had not been preparing for war after contact. They had been waiting for confirmation of intent before revealing their full structure. The moment we chose containment, we declared ourselves enemies. Cathar High Command did not frame it as war, not at first. The directive was clinical, precise orbital suppression of Sol 3's communication lattice, a controlled intervention, a corrective measure. Humanity was advancing too quickly, too unpredictably. Their systems were too interconnected for a species that had never left its own gravity well in force. The assumption was simple: break their coordination and the species collapses. We were wrong. The strike began without warning cycles. Energy discharges lanced across orbital space, targeting satellite clusters, relay networks, and high-altitude communication relays. Our precision arrays mapped human infrastructure with surgical accuracy. Each impact was calculated to disable, not destroy, planetary coordination capacity. For 6 minutes, Earth went dark. No global broadcasts, no satellite emissions, no coherent orbital reflection signatures. From Cathar perspective, the planet had been successfully severed from itself. Silence filled command decks. Then doubt began to surface, because Earth did not respond. No emergency scramble, no fragmented distress signals, no chaotic broadcast noise. Just absence. We interpreted it as shock paralysis, a biological species freezing under system collapse. At minute 7, the planet returned, not as it was.
As something rebuilt in anticipation of destruction. Human orbital presence reconstituted itself across multiple independent layers. Not restored infrastructure, but replacement architecture. Entire satellite clusters emerged from previously undetected orbital debris fields. Civilian communication platforms, never cataloged as military assets, activated synchronized uplinks. Deep space tracking nodes, hidden within commercial launch records, unfolded into active monitoring arrays. These systems had not been created in response to the strike. They had been waiting for it. Cathar analysts reprocessed historical Earth data in panic. Every redundancy system, every covert launch,
Every inactive orbital object suddenly reclassified itself as pre-positioned resilience infrastructure. Humanity had not been fragile, it had been distributed. And then came the second shock. Human coordination did not fracture under attack, it unified, instantly. Across all monitored regions, national boundaries dissolved operationally. Not politically, but functionally. Military systems, scientific arrays, and civilian emergency networks began operating under shared adaptive protocols without formal alliance activation. No negotiation, no command hierarchy, just synchronized acceleration. Human technological output spiked mid-crisis. System efficiency increased while infrastructure was actively under reconstruction. Damage did not slow them, it improved them. Kathir Command attempted to re-engage suppression protocols, but something had changed in the signal environment. Human countersignatures began appearing, not defensive responses, tracking outputs. They were mapping our strike patterns in real time, identifying vector origins, reconstructing Kathir fleet positioning from residual energy echoes embedded in orbital debris trajectories. We were no longer observing Earth. Earth was observing our attack methodology.
A senior Kathir strategist, Ven Kaur, broke protocol silence in the command archive. His report was short, uncomfortably direct. We did not cripple their systems. A pause followed in the recording log, then the continuation. We revealed their contingency plan for us. Immediately after, every surviving Kathir sensor array detected synchronized human uplink activity across all orbital reconstruction nodes. But this time, the emissions were not defensive stabilization signals. They were directional acquisition locks. Every reconstructed human system had oriented outward, toward Kathir fleet vectors, toward command relays, toward us. And for the first time since entering Sol 3 space, Kathir Command registered a new classification tag. Auto-generated, not manually assigned. Targeting awareness. Confirmed. We expected resistance. We did not expect learning. After the failed suppression strike, Kathir analysts anticipated fragmentation. Human systems overwhelmed by contact-level escalation. A species forced into a war it could not structurally comprehend. Instead, Earth adapted. Not gradually. Instantly. Rising tension. Within hours of orbital reconsolidation, human strategic behavior underwent a fundamental transformation. Their response was no longer reactive. It was iterative. Every Kathir maneuver was being studied in real time. Every fleet movement, every signal burst, every suppression pattern, decoded, categorized, and reassembled into predictive models at speeds that violated known cognitive processing limits for biological intelligence. We initially believed they were receiving assistance from unknown external intelligence. No such intelligence existed. They were doing it themselves. Captured fragments of Kathir communication, encrypted battle logs, tactical lattice signatures, fragmented fleet telemetry were not simply decoded. They were weaponized.
Humans reconstructed our decision-making frameworks from incomplete datasets, then used those reconstructions to simulate future Kathir behavior. Their fleets began to move differently, not with technological superiority, but with anticipation. Human formations shifted from defensive clustering into predatory geometry, fluid, decentralized structures that mirrored apex hunting behaviors observed in terrestrial ecosystems. Each unit operated independently, yet contributed to a collective pattern that only became visible at engagement distance. Kathir commanders began reporting something unprecedented. Engagements felt pre-written, as if humans had already simulated every possible outcome before the first exchange began. In response, Kathir High Command escalated technologically. Suppression fields were deployed across contested orbital corridors, advanced interference matrices designed to destabilize coordination, disrupt sensor cohesion, and fragment enemy command structures. On paper, the strategy was decisive. In practice, it failed within minutes. Humans did not resist the suppression fields. They bypassed them. Instead of reinforcing centralized systems, Earth's networks fractured intentionally, splitting into autonomous microfleets, decoy signatures, and redundant ghost formations that existed only long enough to misdirect targeting solutions. Where Kathir systems sought stability, humans introduced chaos, controlled chaos. Every suppression attempt created more uncertainty in Kathir targeting matrices than in human operations. Psychological warfare vectors began appearing across open channels, false retreat signatures, phantom distress signals, simulated command collapses designed to trigger premature engagement responses. And it worked. Kathir forces began hesitating, not from lack of capability, from lack of certainty. Because every time they believed they had located a core human formation, it dissolved into another configuration.
Every time they committed to engagement, the target shifted, already anticipating the strike window before it opened. Fear entered Kathir command structure for the first time. Not fear of destruction, fear of comprehension. Because the more they engaged humans, the more it felt like being studied in return. Then came the broadcasts. They were not coordinated through visible channels. They emerged across fragmented deep space frequencies, embedded in background radiation noise, piggybacking on Kathir-owned communication relays. At first, they appeared as corrupted signal residue. Then patterns emerged, then language. Human origin transmissions, deliberately incomplete, intentionally fractured, designed to bypass interception filters while preserving psychological intent. Each message varied slightly, but one phrase repeated across all regions, across all cycles. We are still deciding how angry we should be. Kathir linguistics teams attempted to classify it as intimidation propaganda, but internal behavioral impact analysis flagged something worse. Engagement hesitation increased by 38%. Command delay intervals widened. Fire control certainty degraded across multiple fleets. And every hesitation created opportunity gaps. Every gap became a human advantage. By the time Kathir realized the pattern, it was already embedded in their operational psychology. Humans were no longer winning engagements. They were shaping the conditions in which engagements could occur. And in the silence between fleet movements, one final observation was recorded in the Kathir Psychological Archive. We are not fighting them. We are being tested by them. Certainty is a luxury of the untested mind. We no longer possessed it. Kathir High Command did not break in a single moment. It fractured, slowly, then all at once. Like a hull stressed beyond material tolerance, cracks forming where once there was unity, spreading through every layer of strategic consensus. Sol 3 was no longer a target. It was a question no faction could answer the same way. The first division was philosophical, then immediately operational. One faction advocated immediate withdrawal from the system. Their logic was simple. Classification failure invalidates engagement protocol. If a species cannot be predicted, it cannot be controlled. And if it cannot be controlled, continued contact becomes self-endangerment. Another faction demanded total extermination, not out of confidence, but out of fear. Fear that anything unpredictable at this scale could not be allowed to persist. Between these extremes, the majority faction stalled, because all predictive models had collapsed. Every simulation of human response produced contradiction. Humans appeared disorganized, fragmented, even inefficient in isolation. Yet when engagement occurred, those same inefficiencies converged into outcomes that consistently favored them. Chaos was no longer noise. It was structure we did not understand. Kathir analysts attempted to rebuild predictive frameworks from scratch. They failed, then failed faster, then stopped reporting confidence margins altogether. For the first time in recorded Kathir history, an intelligent species had become unmodelable. And worse, this realization spread emotionally, not just analytically. Doubt entered the system. Not external doubt, internal erosion of superiority. Field reports from engagement zones amplified this collapse. Human units, when observed directly, behaved impossibly. Soldiers maintained operational calm under conditions that should have induced systemic breakdown. Communication silence under extreme stress, equipment failure compensation without external support, continuation of mission parameters even after structural collapse of supporting systems. They did not retreat. They adapted inside failure. One report described human engineering crews repairing orbital platform damage while still under kinetic fire.
Another documented infantry units holding positions after complete loss of supply chains, operating on improvised systems assembled mid-conflict.
But the most disturbing pattern was not survival. It was intentional exposure to loss conditions, as if humans were training inside their own destruction envelope. We began revising biological constraint assumptions, then discarding them entirely. Because humans no longer behaved like a species bound by known physiological or psychological limits. They behaved like will had replaced constraint, and will had no measurable boundary. The incident that broke remaining certainty occurred in Sector Relay Grid K-17. A human pilot-class craft, classified as obsolete, heavily damaged, and structurally compromised, was engaged by Kathir interdiction forces during a standard suppression sweep. It should have been neutralized within seconds. Instead, it continued functioning beyond system viability thresholds. Internal reports later confirmed catastrophic failures, propulsion instability, life support collapse, navigation system disintegration. The pilot did not eject, did not surrender, did not broadcast distress. Instead, the craft altered trajectory, manually, without automated assistance. Using degraded control interfaces and non-standard input overrides, the human pilot guided the crippled vessel through a controlled descent pattern that defied remaining structural integrity limits. Kathir commanders initially dismissed it as uncontrolled drift, until impact prediction recalibration began. The craft was not drifting, it was targeting. Its final trajectory aligned directly with a Kathir command relay node, one of the system's primary coordination hubs. No interception window remained. No defensive response was possible within calculated reaction time. The vessel impacted with absolute precision. The relay vanished. So did its surrounding escort formation.
But what spread through Kathir command space was not the loss of infrastructure. It was the realization embedded within it. The pilot had remained conscious through system death cycles long enough to convert personal extinction into strategic elimination. Not survival behavior, not desperation. Design. Across all Kathir fleets, engagement logs began auto-tagging a new classification field. Unrequested, unapproved, system-generated. Human action signature. Intentional sacrifice efficiency exceeds predicted maximum tactical output. No analyst removed it. No commander challenged it. Because something more immediate had begun to spread through command structure faster than data. Silence before decisions. Delays before engagement. Hesitation before certainty. And in that growing gap between intention and action, one final unified observation was recorded across fractured Kathir fleets. We are no longer losing battles. We are losing confidence in what a battle even is. We expected defense. We received pursuit. Kathir's strategic doctrine had no category for what followed Earth's internal collapse of certainty. Every prior engagement had been interpreted through a single lens: containment of a planetary intelligence reacting to external pressure. That lens shattered the moment human fleets left Sol 3 orbit. Rising tension. The first anomaly was not the presence of human ships. It was their absence where they should have been. Our long-range scanners detected no large-scale exodus signatures, no conventional fleet buildup, no visible staging corridors. Yet across monitored space lanes, Kathir asset relays began reporting contact losses. Then sightings emerged. Human vessels appeared in impossible vectors, emerging from gravitational shear zones, debris fields, and stellar shadow corridors previously deemed non-navigable. They were not traveling through space in expected linear trajectories. They were arriving through it. Each appearance was brief, surgical.
A Kathir logistics convoy would register anomaly distortion and cease function within minutes. A relay station would detect human signature overlap and go dark before full defensive response could initialize. There was no sustained occupation pattern, only impact events, followed by disappearance. We attempted to categorize these engagements under known asymmetric warfare models. None applied. Humanity was not holding territory. They were erasing dependencies. Every Kathir loss was immediately followed by a human adaptation cycle. captured data from failed engagements was integrated into subsequent maneuvers within hours. What we destroyed in one encounter returned in the next iteration, refined, optimized, unpredictable. It was no longer a war of attrition. It was a feedback loop, and humanity was accelerating inside it. Kathir command infrastructure began experiencing systemic degradation, not from direct destruction alone, but from operational instability. Communication relays failed due to constant recalibration. Tactical networks collapsed under contradictory prediction updates. Fleet coordination degraded as no two engagements could be assumed to follow similar rules. We were no longer fighting a fixed opponent. We were fighting an evolving process. Humanity had stopped responding to war conditions. They were using war conditions as input. Twist. The most alarming realization came from intercepted Kathir battlefield analysis logs. Human fleets were not just adapting tactically, they were diverging strategically. Different human caste groups began developing entirely separate combat philosophies, some optimized for speed, others for deception, others for psychological disruption, yet all remained coherent under a higher-level coordination structure we could not detect. It was not central command, it was distributed intention alignment, as if humanity no longer needed agreement to remain unified in outcome.
Kathir attempts to predict human fleet convergence points failed repeatedly. Every predicted engagement zone became empty. Every assumed vulnerability was already compensated for by unknown prior preparation. And yet, humans never seemed to be everywhere at once. They simply appeared exactly where consequences were required. Then came the message. It was not transmitted through conventional channels. It was embedded in multiple intercepted Kathir relay echoes, reconstructed only after cross-system pattern alignment. It originated from human command architecture, but no single origin node could be identified. It was distributed across the entire network. And it said only this: "You taught us we are not alone. Now we are learning what that means." Immediately after, 3 Kathir deep space staging hubs ceased to exist as coordinated systems, not destroyed in sequence, simultaneously, as if human action had already accounted for every possible response we had not yet made. Kathir High Command attempted to issue a universal fleet stabilization directive. The transmission failed mid-broadcast, not due to interference, but due to overload of conflicting predictive futures generated by human counter-analysis systems. For the first time, Kathir command space did not go silent. It went uncertain. And in that uncertainty, human fleet signatures began converging toward Kathir core logistics arteries, not as attackers, but as inevitabilities already in motion. Empires do not fall when they are defeated. They fall when they can no longer agree on what defeat looks like. Kathir High Command recorded the first signs of systemic fragmentation as isolated anomalies: minor disruptions in logistics routing, temporary communication delays, misaligned fleet synchronization. Individually, each event was negligible. Collectively, they were the beginning of collapse. And none of it resembled war as we understood it. Rising tension. Supply chains failed first.
Not through destruction, but absence. Entire convoys would arrive at coordinates where no receiving infrastructure existed. Resource shipments vanished into empty spatial corridors. Navigation beacons redirected themselves without external input. It was as if space itself had become unreliable. Then, communication broke. Not jammed, not intercepted, deconstructed. Messages between Kathir command nodes began arriving incomplete, reordered, or mathematically valid but semantically meaningless. Fleet coordination degraded not because signals were lost, but because meaning could no longer be preserved across distance. We attempted redundancy layering, error correction protocols, multi-vector encoding. Each solution failed faster than the last iteration. And then fleets began disappearing. Not destroyed in battle, not logged as casualties, simply no longer responding. When trace analysis was finally possible, the pattern emerged. They had not been eliminated. They had been redirected. Human interference was no longer focused on frontline engagements. That phase had already passed. Instead, humans targeted structural dependency points, logistics cores, predictive coordination hubs, perception nodes embedded deep within Kathir operational architecture. They were not fighting our ships. They were dismantling the conditions that made fleet coordination possible, and they were doing it faster than we could rebuild it. Kythir analysts attempted to reframe the conflict as asymmetric warfare. That interpretation lasted less than a cycle before being invalidated, because asymmetry implies imbalance between comparable systems. This was not comparable. Humanity was no longer reacting to Kythir presence. They were redesigning the battlefield, while we were still defining it. Twist. The realization came too late to be operationally useful. War had never been about force exchange. It had been about adaptation velocity. And humanity's rate of adaptation was no longer incremental.
It was exponential. Every Kythir countermeasure generated data that humans used to refine their next iteration. Every attempt to stabilize fleets introduced new instability vectors they immediately exploited. Every effort to restore communication coherence provided them with deeper insight into our structural weaknesses. We were no longer losing battles. We were accelerating their learning curve. Kythir High Command issued emergency retreat protocols across all surviving sectors. The directive was absolute: withdraw, regroup, recalculate. But execution failed, because retreat requires coordination, and coordination no longer existed in stable form. Human operations had already extended across every known escape vector, not by occupying space, but by predicting it. Every potential withdrawal corridor was already compromised by prior human presence or adaptive interception planning. We attempted to open emergency blind corridors, unmapped escape routes through unstable space folds. They were already mapped and already mined, not with weapons, but with contingencies designed to trigger failure in movement predictability itself. There was no direction left that was not accounted for, no region left that was not already part of human operational awareness. A final consolidated report was generated across fragmented Kythir command remnants. It was not written by any single analyst. It assembled itself from shared system conclusions. Conclusion: engagement no longer possible under current assumptions of spatial autonomy. A second line appended automatically: humanity has eliminated the concept of retreat by removing unobserved space. Across remaining fleets, engines began powering down, not from order, but from inevitability. And in the silence that followed, Kythir commanders finally understood the truth. They were no longer being hunted across the battlefield. They were being contained within it. The Kythir did not lose control. They chose erasure. In the final attempt to reclaim dominance over Sol 3's expanding human influence, Kythir High Command activated what had never before been deployed outside simulation archives: the Systemic Annihilation Doctrine. Entire star corridors were designated for sterilization. Supply lanes, relay grids, and suspected human convergence zones were marked for total energetic cleansing. If humans could not be contained, they would be removed from possibility itself. For the first time since contact, space went quiet. Not peaceful, empty. Rising tension. Scorched sectors burned in coordinated waves of energy displacement. Navigation beacons collapsed into static voids. Entire regions of monitored space lost structural definition as Kythir forces executed full-spectrum annihilation patterns. And for a brief interval, it seemed effective. Human signals vanished. No counter-movements, no adaptive interference. Even Kythir analysts hesitated to interpret the silence as victory, because by now, silence had become suspicious. Still, a cycle passed with no human response. Then another. The void held. Kythir command registers began cautiously reinitializing predictive models, attempting to rebuild operational confidence from absence data. Some argued humanity had finally reached its biological limit under sustained systemic pressure. Others did not speak at all, because something in the data felt wrong. Not missing. Waited. Then it happened. Not an emergence. A correction. Twist. Humanity responded without warning signatures. No gradual reactivation, no staged fleet buildup, no fragmented reconnection of systems. Every restraint protocol across Earth-originated command structures deactivated simultaneously. What emerged into monitored space was not the fractured coalition we had fought before. It was singularity of intent. Human fleets reappeared across multiple vectors, not as scattered national forces, but as a unified operational intelligence structure spanning all previously known human factions. There was no visible hierarchy, no competing doctrine, no internal delay. Only execution. Kathir analysts attempted immediate classification. No category applied. Human response doctrine had fundamentally shifted. They were no longer operating under survival logic. They were operating under corrective logic. Every Kathir remaining asset was mapped in real time, not just location, but function, dependency, and strategic relevance. Human operations did not target indiscriminately. They removed systems with precision proportional to perceived threat origin. Logistics nodes disappeared first, then coordination hubs, then perception layers. Not as destruction, as surgical deletion from operational reality. Kathir forces attempting resistance encountered something unprecedented: emotional absence in combat signatures. No hesitation, no escalation noise, no reactive anger spikes. Just clean, structured elimination patterns. It was not war as expression, it was war as process, and processes do not negotiate. Across all surviving Kathir channels, a unified human transmission was finally received without fragmentation or delay. No encryption barriers remained active, no interference distorted the message. It was delivered with absolute clarity. You were the test. We passed. Immediately following the transmission, 3 Kathir command bastions ceased function, not through attack signatures, but through synchronized system shutdown cascades triggered by loss of operational relevance. Then came the final archival entry, auto-generated across every remaining Kathir record core. Observation: humans did not escalate the war. A pause, long enough to feel intentional. Then the conclusion: they ended the idea that we could ever begin one.